President Trump mused in an interview that the Civil War could have been avoided if only Andrew Jackson had been around to stop it. Jackson had been dead 16 years and long out of office when the war started in 1861. Mr. Trump's comments, among several he made about Jackson in an interview broadcast Monday on satellite radio, quickly drew condemnation from his critics and from historians who said they appeared to show the president profoundly misunderstanding American history. "People don't realize, the Civil War, if you think about it, why?" he told his interviewer, Salena Zito, a host on SiriusXM's P.O.T.U.S channel, who spoke to Mr. Trump for an article that was published on Sunday in the Washington Examiner. Mr. Trump followed up on the comment in a tweet on Monday night, arguing that Jackson saw the Civil War coming and would have prevented it had he not died 16 years earlier. Continue reading the main story. Related coverage. The wild inauguration of Andrew Jackson, Trump's populist predecessor, January 20, 2017. A history of presidents, mostly Democrats, paying homage to Jackson, March 15, 2017. Jackson and Trump, how two populist presidents compare, March 15, 2017. Mr. Trump has often professed admiration for the seventh president's populism and visited his tomb in March. Julian Eliza, a professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University, called Mr. Trump's comments on Jackson and the Civil War the height of inaccurate historical revisionism. We fact-checked Mr. Trump's claims with the help of John Meacham, the historian whose 2008 biography, American Lion, Andrew Jackson in the White House, won a Pulitzer Prize. Trump, he had a very, very mean and nasty campaign. Because they said this was the meanest and the nastiest. President Trump is correct that the 1828 race between Andrew Jackson and the incumbent, John Quincy Adams, was hard-fought and often descended into ad hominem attacks on both sides. The insults leveled at Jackson's wife, Rachel, were particularly vicious. She was accused of marrying Jackson before her divorce from her first husband, Louis Roberts, was final. Trump, his wife died. They destroyed his wife, and she died. The campaign took a notable toll on Rachel Donaldson Roberts Jackson. She died suddenly, shortly before Christmas in 1828. There's no question that Jackson believed that the campaign had killed his wife, Mr. Meacham said. That's basically right. Trump, had Andrew Jackson been a little later, you wouldn't have had the Civil War. He was a very tough person, but he had a big heart. He was really angry that he saw what was happening with regard to the Civil War, he said. There's no reason for this. Jackson died in 1845. The Civil War broke out in 1861. Mr. Meacham said he thought that Mr. Trump may have been referring to the nullification crisis, which did occur during Jackson's lifetime. The crisis, which began in 1832, was a conflict between the federal government and South Carolina, a southern state that would later be instrumental in the movement for secession. During the crisis, President Jackson took a firm stand on the side of the Union, Mr. Meacham said, adding, there are two stray Trumpian ideas that collided into each other when he talked. Trump, people don't realize, the Civil War, if you think about it, why? People don't ask that question, but why was there the Civil War? Why could that one not have been worked out? Mr. Trump has questioned the necessity of the Civil War before, in an interview with Mr. Meacham before the election. At the time, President Trump said that he had always felt that the South overplayed their hand. He told Mr. Meacham. Had Jackson been alive at the start of the Civil War, Mr. Meacham said, it would be difficult to predict his reaction. It would have brought his commitment to the Union into conflict with his identity as an unapologetic slave owner. Mr. Jackson was from Tennessee, which fought for the Confederacy. But any president would have had to contend with the South's attempt to expand the institution of slavery into territory newly acquired by the United States. It's what Mr. Meacham called the unavoidable historical question. The expansion of slavery caused the Civil War, he said. And you can't get around that. So what does Trump mean? Would he have let slavery exist but not expand? That's the counterfactual question you have to ask. President Donald Trump on Monday once again defied the history books, this time claiming that Andrew Jackson was really angry about the Civil War, despite having died 16 years before the first shots were fired, and puzzled why a deal wasn't cut to avoid the war altogether. He was really angry that he saw with regard to the Civil War, he said. There's no reason for this, Trump said in a radio interview with conservative writer Salena Zito broadcast Monday. The Civil War, if you think about it, why? People don't ask the question, but why was there the Civil War? Why could that one not have been worked out? Trump added. Trump for months has riled up history buffs with a range of eyebrow-raising comments, including his claim that not many people knew Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, his apparent ignorance that famed abolitionist Frederick Douglass died many years ago, and his question about whether anyone had heard of Susan B. Anthony. And the fact that he didn't seem to be aware of the extensive literature about the cause of the Civil War is now added to the list. It's probably the most hotly debated issue in American history, said historian Charles P.O.T.U.S, a professor at Williams College, who wrote a landmark 2001 book, Apostles of Disunion, on the causes of the war. The president's comments on Monday struck some historians as darker than a history goof, with the president seeming to minimize the painful history of slavery in the United States and to talk up Jackson's role as a strongman leader who proudly owned many slaves. It's the kind of comment that will get applause from neo-Confederate circles in the South, said Douglas Brinkley, a presidential historian at Rice University. Confederate flags were a common sight at Trump rallies during the 2016 campaign, and the monuments to Confederate leaders are common in southern states. Some in Trump's circle, including chief strategist Steve Bannon, have sought to liken Trump to Jackson, a populist. In March, Trump visited Jackson's gravesite in Nashville, Tennessee, where he declared himself a fan. Steve Bannon has made Jackson the epitome of the hardscrabble, American folk hero, added Brinkley. And Trump has bought into Steve Bannon's version of Andrew Jackson. On Monday night, the president tweeted, President Andrew Jackson, who died 16 years before the Civil War started, saw it coming and was angry. Would never have let it happen. Jackson, who was a slaveholder, threatened to use federal military force against South Carolina when the state sought to nullify federal tariffs. He died in 1845, 16 years before the Civil War erupted at Fort Sumter. What I saw in that comment was his belief, his attraction to a kind of strongman history, said David Blight, a Civil War historian at Yale University. It's so completely out of any knowledge or context to suggest that somehow Jackson would have headed off the Civil War. The broad consensus among historians is that the secession of 11 southern states, and the resulting war, was driven by slavery and the racial order that slavery represented. The Confederacy's vice president, Alexander H. Stephens, said himself that the South's foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and moral condition. The myth that the Civil War was fought over not slavery, but states' rights, has become an article of faith for some in the South and those in the white supremacist movement. Some Southern states instituted Robert E. Lee Day, celebrating the Confederate general, to fall on the same day as Martin Luther King Jr. Day after Congress established the holiday in 1983. To have the occupant of the Oval Office cast doubt on the historical consensus could hearten those who downplay the significance that racism had in driving the war, historians said. On Monday, as controversy swirled around Trump's remarks, the white supremacist and outspoken Trump supporter David Duke was tweeting about efforts by the Democratic mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, to remove a Confederate monument. Confederate heritage, Duke wrote, is America's heritage. Democrats were quick to call out Trump for his remarks. President Trump doesn't understand why there was a civil war. It's because my ancestors and millions of others were enslaved, wrote Representative Barbara Lee, Democrat California, on Twitter. Senator Cory Booker, DNJ, simply tweeted a quote from the writer James Baldwin: "Ignorance, allied with power, is the most ferocious enemy justice can have." In a tweeted clip of the interview, Trump compares his successful election campaign to Andrew Jackson's, an analogy he has made before. He goes on to suggest that Jackson, who was president from 1829 to 1837 and died in 1845, could have prevented the Civil War, which broke out in 1861. Trump also questions why the U.S. had a civil war. "They said my campaign and is most like, my campaign and win, was most like Andrew Jackson with his campaign. And I said, when was Andrew Jackson? It was 1828. That's a long time ago. That's Andrew Jackson, and he had a very, very mean and nasty campaign, because they said this was the meanest and nastiest campaign since," Trump said, going on to call Jackson a swashbuckler. "I mean, had Andrew Jackson been a little later, you wouldn't have had the Civil War. He was a very tough person, but he had a big heart. He was really angry that he saw what was happening with regard to the Civil War. He said, there's no reason for this, people don't realize, the Civil War, you think about it, why? People don't ask that question, but why was there the Civil War? Why could that one not have been worked out?" Trump tweeted later Monday night that Jackson would never have let it happen. There is still debate among some historians over the precise causes of the Civil War, but the non-profit Civil War Trust, dedicated to preserving Civil War battlegrounds, quotes author James McPherson's view that it started because of uncompromising differences between the free and slave states over the power of the national government to prohibit slavery in the territories that had not yet become states. The war began when 7 southern slave states tried to secede from the United States. In an interview with CBS on Saturday, large portions of which were released this morning, Trump told Face the Nation anchor John Dickerson that he has no relationship with his predecessor Obama. "He was very nice to me, but after we've had some difficulties," Trump said. "It doesn't matter. Words are less important to me than deeds. You saw what happened with surveillance, and everybody saw what happened with surveillance. I think that was inappropriate." Trump previously touted what he said was a beautiful letter that Obama left for him in the Oval Office, but said on CBS that the relationship has soured since. "Look, you can figure it out yourself. He was very nice to me with words, and when I was with him, but after that, there has been no relationship," Trump said. Asked if he stands by his unsubstantiated claim that Obama wiretapped Trump Tower in New York City, Trump said, "I don't stand by anything. I think you can take it any way you want. Our side has been proved very strongly, and everybody is talking about it. And frankly, it should be discussed. I think that's a very big surveillance of our citizens. Think it's a very big topic and it should be number one and we should find out what the hell is going on."